Well, Dr. Gary Richter, nice to see you. It's been a minute.
Yes, it has, and it is good to see you as well.
Yeah. Just to contextualize for my audience, the auspices under which we met was a human thing, not a dog thing, not a cat thing, a human thing, all about longevity and life extension.
Right.
And first off, meeting you was just like, what a cool guy, right? Chill, easy, easy hang. You go to a lot of these conferences and people are selling themselves, people are trying to, do the look at me thing. And you're just a chill dude who's kind of doing his thing, which I always gravitate towards. And then I'm like, oh, he's an animal guy. What's he doing at a human thing? Right. And I realized that it was just such a cool juxtaposition of a veterinary guru sitting here looking at the human data science and looking at life extension and longevity across the board for mammals, right? Because it progresses your thinking, because
Sure.
it progresses the way you look at it. So I really appreciated that about you being there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you're a famous vet, right? You've helped me with my dogs over the years, and you've really kind of made a name for yourself by stepping out there. And it's not that you're anti-conventional, but you're looking at all things, right? Which is really refreshing in veterinary medicine. How did that journey start for you?
That's a great question, and it started. I'd had a brief, we'll say, I had a brush with acupuncture and Chinese medicine when I was in veterinary school. That was enough to pique my interest. But in the midst of just the madness of what veterinary school is, there was no time for me to really explore that. And then, years later, I'd been out in practice for probably, I don't know, 3, 4 years. Um, it's a funny thing about medicine that I think a lot of people who are not in healthcare don't realize. But I mean, medical practice in many ways it's really following an algorithm. So if this, then you do that. And, depending on what your test results go, and you do this, that, and the other thing. And like any algorithm, there is a finite end to the thing. And, after being in practice for 3 or 4 years, I started to really see where the hard stops were in the medicine that I was practicing. And you start to see it coming down the road that day when you have to go to somebody and say, look, there's nothing else that we can do to help your dog or your cat or whatever animal it may be. So take them home and keep them comfortable. And when it's time, call me. And to be honest with you, I have never enjoyed having that conversation with people. It is not a fun conversation to have. And as somebody who has dedicated their life to the health and welfare of animals, the last thing I want to do is tell somebody there's nothing left to do. So what that ultimately led to was me starting to explore other avenues that were outside of the kind of scope of what I was taught in veterinary school. And I got an excellent education at University of Florida Veterinary School. Um, but I needed to look elsewhere. And because of that sort of brush I had had with acupuncture and vet school, that was really the first place I went. Is I got trained in acupuncture. And what I found almost as soon as I started practicing acupuncture was that hard stop in my treatment plan suddenly became a little further away. I had effectively moved the goalpost. And from acupuncture that led to chiropractic to herbal medicine to hyperbaric oxygen and any number of other modalities. And what I found is the more things I added, the further that goalpost got, and the less frequently I had to have that conversation I didn't want to have. And it kind of just led me down a path of creating a medical philosophy and a medical practice of let me incorporate any scientifically legitimate treatment modality that I can into my practice to help my patients do better. I don't really care what the general Western medical establishment has to say about it. As long as I have scientific justification and it works in my hands, we're going to go ahead and do that. And that was 20 plus years ago. And it has really turned into something magical. I mean, we're able to do things in my practice that you just don't see happen in medical practice, animal or human, for the most part. And it's incredibly rewarding to be able to make things better that, by traditional medical standards are not supposed to be better.
I love that perspective. I mean, a lot of docs will stop at do no harm and not really think through that the modality that they are looking to maybe flirt with hasn't demonstrated any harm. Like acupuncture, come on, unless you're going to puncture a lung or you're just really bad at placement.
Yeah,
It's been around for 6,000 years, and hundreds of millions of people have undergone this thing.
sure.
Right, data's there.
Yeah.
um there's a couple points I want to unpack here. One of them is actually broader medical paradigm, which is we like to find the really smart robot monkeys and give them an algorithm and tell them to think this way and stop here
Uh huh.
and don't question, right? Which is has a whole slew of implications and challenges downstream, right? Which is, thank you for learning the biochem. Now here's what you do, doctor. Um, and you broke that mold and you moved further into this kind of wild, wild west, if you will, especially 25 years ago. I mean, come on, right? That was hippies doing stuff. That was weird woo doing stuff. Right now, everyone's trying to catch up and claim that they're doing this stuff. You were ahead of the times. But then the learnings that come from that, right? The advancement of medicine and science, and the general kind of paradigm that you've expanded in your own clinical practice and kind of trailblazed on. I'm sure people have hated on you. We can talk about that later, right? Like the traditionalists saying, what's this guy doing? But what was the stop, say for, let's talk about 2 or 3 diagnoses 25 years ago that you blew past the goalpost and now it's just like there's this unbelievable amount of results and a body of work that you can show for it?
Sure. And I think a great example of that is kidney failure. We see kidney failure a lot, particularly in cats. It's something that happens very frequently in older kitties. And frankly, there is not a whole lot from the Western paradigm perspective that you can do. You can make adjustments to their diet. You can give them supplemental fluids. You can add in a few different medications or supplements to basically help sort of mitigate the side effects of the kidney failure. But that's pretty much it. That's all you can really do. And as illogical as it may seem to Western medical brain, something like acupuncture can be incredibly helpful. Certain Chinese herbs, one very well-known Chinese herb in particular called Romania, actually has, excuse me for the fire truck going by, Romania has research-based evidence behind it to show that it actually increases blood flow to the kidneys. I am not aware of a pharmaceutical that can do that, but Romania can. But yet that's not something that anybody looks at from a Western medical perspective. Uh, Another thing that I found is instead of these, shall we say, prescription diets that many pets get put on, if we utilize a similar nutritional profile but use a fresh whole food diet, we tend to get a lot better results and get a lot further down the road. So acupuncture, herbs, better nutrition, a great sort of trifecta, if you will, to make a really big impact in an older cat that has poor kidney function. Whereas before it was give them subcutaneous fluids, feed them this prescription diet, and call me when things aren't working.
Let's go back a little bit because older cat used to be, older lion when he couldn't hunt anymore, rolled over and got eaten. I mean, in the African savannah, how much kidney failure is there, or do they not get old enough for that type of diagnosis?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is the latter, in so much as they don't get old enough. So frequently, why the reason why wild cats die is actually dental issues. Believe it or not, so they lose enough teeth or they break enough teeth that they can't hunt anymore. And that's and, you know, the combination of that and essentially as they get older being run off by a more dominant animal from their territory, that frequently is what leads them effectively to starve to death. So, you know, things like, you know, end stage kidney failure, while it probably happens sometimes in the wild, it's not the norm because these animals aren't living long enough for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. The luxury of long life, doesn't happen in the wild.
Not usually.
Um, what about what I mean, I've actually gotten freeze-dried snacks that are kinda whole food stuff for my dogs from
Yep.
you, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you, by the way, they love it.
Yeah.
Um, Whole foods versus synthetic kibble. I know people that, I mean, God bless them because I don't have the time or energy for this, that are like, buying frozen meats from the butcher and cutting them up and doing the whole thing.
Right.
What have you seen? There's so many trends I've seen come and go. Like, you're the guy, so I might as well ask on behalf of everyone here.
Sure. So to me, without question, the lowest hanging fruit from a natural medicine, holistic medicine, longevity medicine perspective, whether you're talking about animals or people, is proper nutrition. You know, there's a couple of things to say about that. Number one, every animal, human, dog, cat, what have you, every animal on the planet evolved eating a fresh whole food diet. Nobody evolved to eat food out of a bag or a can. And if you think about a biological system, whether it's our body or your dog or your cat, if you think about that biological system as a biological machine, that machine is designed, evolutionarily speaking, to run optimally off of a certain spectrum of nutrients. Just like my car is engineered to run off of a certain type of gas and a certain type of oil and other various fluids, if I put the wrong kind of gas in my car, will my car run? Probably. Will it run well? Probably not. Now, it turns out that biology is a lot more forgiving than my car. If I were to put, say, diesel fuel in my unleaded car, it would not go well. Biology will let you get away with a lot more than that, which is, certainly an explanation why you've got people out there that are eating pizza and French fries for their entire life and still managing to live into their 60s. But the reality is if you're gonna play the odds and you want to take advantage of everything that biology has to offer for us or our pets, you feed them the biological fuel, the food that their body was evolutionarily designed to thrive on, which is fresh whole foods. Now, certainly the spectrum of nutrients that are optimal for you and I are going to be a little bit different than for our dog or our cat because it's a different machine. But at the end of the day, without question, fresh whole foods are ideal. And when we look at these highly processed foods for animals, it's a disaster. Number one, kibble, because that's what most people feed. So we'll stick with that for the purposes of this discussion. Kibble is, generally speaking, 60 or 70% carbohydrates, completely evolutionarily inappropriate for dogs, let alone cats that are obligate carnivores. And furthermore, all of that high heat processing leads to the formation of things like advanced glycated end products, Maillard reactant products that we know promote inflammation and cause cancer. And the irony is when you look at the amount of these compounds that your average dog or cat are eating, it's somewhere between 30 and 100 times more than your average person is eating on a day-to-day basis because most people aren't eating 100% processed food all day, every day. Whereas that's exactly what we're asking our dogs and our cats to do. And then everybody scratches their head about why rates of cancer are going. It makes no sense. And it's the easiest thing in the world to fix.
So we've had this with our local veterinarians, right? Like moving from California to Utah, you get what you get sometimes. And so, I've gotten into arguments and I'm no vet, so it's hard for me to stand toe to toe with someone who's went to school for this, saying, look, here is the scientifically formulated pharmaceutical version of kibble that we've been told is best for this dog. take this. And it's like a prescription vet diet thing that they're all pushing through their offices. And I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is grains, this is this, this is that." And it's completely counter to, the rabbit, the whole rabbit, like the fur, the teeth, the eyeball, the goopy brain, all of it that you envision this animal having, in the wild.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a true statement. And I think this is a good moment to maybe just highlight something, which I think a lot of people kind of lose sight of, which is almost without exception, every veterinarian that you talk to, and for that matter, every physician that you talk to, is practicing the best medicine they know how to practice. Uh, it's all coming from the heart. I hear people go down the road of, oh, my veterinarian is just recommending these prescription diets because he makes money off of them, or they're more interested in money than they are in my pet. That is a load of crap. And that needs to be sort of disavowed. That said, most Western medical professionals, veterinary or human, are sort of in this box of what they teach us in veterinary school and medical school. And when I was in vet school, I was taught put the dog on a kibble that they do well on and leave them on that basically until they get a point in their life where they require a prescription diet. That was what I was taught. And if I'm being honest, at the time it made perfect sense to me. When you have a little bit more space and distance from that academic environment, and you learn more about sort of just the way biology and nutrition works, you start to see the holes in that logic. You start to see the problems about, the lack of whole foods, the elevated carbohydrates, all of these sort of inflammatory products that show up in these foods. But realize that, most veterinarians and most physicians get almost no nutritional education in school. And what we do get is either directly or indirectly fed to us from the big pet food companies, which are multi-billion-dollar companies that clearly have an agenda. And unfortunately, that's where most veterinarians are getting their information from. So it's really no big surprise that those companies are not talking to people about, wow, maybe you should feed this animal a fresh whole food diet. Although I have often thought that one of these days I'm going to walk into a veterinary conference and one of these big companies, be it Hills or Purina or Royal Canin or somebody, is going to be advertising the latest and greatest thing in pet food, which is going to be a fresh food diet. And they're going to claim that they invented the thing. And I'm going to look and scratch my head and say, good, we finally got there. Let's move forward. I don't care what they claim as long as they're recommending the right thing.
Yeah. Amen. It's, I've been around medicine for my entire adult life. And let me tell you what doctors look like. They look like people. They're coming out with a load of student loans and debt.
Yep.
They're probably at a reproductive age where now they're on a hurry up offense to like build a family and make babies, and they got car payments and they want to go home and not be working either. And so it's very easy to just say, well, this is what we know and this is what I've been taught. And I'm going to go with this until I start questioning things and come out of the fog of war of, med school and kids and all of it. So I appreciate that position, right? Because I don't think there's like an intrinsic evil plot here
No.
other than market driven forces that, own the education, which I mean, I guess you could kind of read into that as being intrinsically evil, but it's people trying to, build products around what they think are sustainable businesses. Now, is that best for your dog? I don't think that's what you're saying, right?
No, that's exactly right. And I mean, to take that one step further, financially speaking, as a doctor, you have to see a certain number of patients every hour, or you're not paying the bills, or your employer is going to get upset with you and you're not going to have a job. And furthermore, I think the other issue that comes up with is, take a practitioner that's been out for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. Um, there's this really difficult moment of self-evaluation that has to happen if you start thinking about this kind of stuff, be it nutrition or other sorts of integrative care. What it requires you to do is metaphorically look in the mirror and admit to yourself that for however long you've been in practice, you have not been doing as good a job as you thought you were. That is not an easy place for people to go. Again, doctors are practicing from the heart. We all think we're doing the best possible job we can. And for you to have to admit, holy shit, maybe I've really not been doing this all that well. That's a tough place to go. And a lot of people just, they don't want to go there. And I get that. But, from the perspective of how do we do right by our patients, you just kind of have to be there.
Well, that's also part of growth, right?
It
Personal
is.
growth, development. It's called a practice for a reason, right? We're
Amen
we're
to
we're
that.
getting better, right? We're getting better every day. So, okay, so what does this look like? I know that there are whole food kind of, conglomerations, approximations, like freeze dry this stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know very many people that have like a rabbit farm that they feed to their huskies, right? And so like in the real politique of what that looks like for a guy who just got back from work and the dogs are hungry, like
sure.
what's the easiest way to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's sort of where the rubber hits the road from the perspective of, we can talk about what is ideal nutritionally speaking, but, as I tell people in my office all the time, any recommendation that I make for you for your pet, whether it's food, supplements, medication, whatever it is, that plan has to be sustainable. Because if you're gonna do it for a week or 2 and then say, "This is too hard, I'm not gonna do it," then I haven't done you any favors. So, how do we make optimal nutrition sustainable? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. The great news these days is there are foods you can go out and buy that are ready-made. So you can buy ready-made raw food. You can buy ready-made cooked food that's frozen. You buy it, you thaw it out, you feed it. You can also buy freeze dried food. So, for example, my company, Ultimate Pet Nutrition, makes freeze dried, perfectly balanced whole food diets for dogs and cats. And the great thing about freeze dried is you get more or less all of the benefits of these fresh whole foods, but it is about as easy as kibble in the sense of doesn't need to be refrigerated or frozen. It's shelf stable. You literally put it in a bowl, add some water, and feed it. So, from the standpoint of like, let's be real, you just worked an 11-hour day. You're freaking tired. Your kids have homework you have to help them with. You don't have 20 minutes to spend preparing food for the dog. Well, you know what? Freeze dried is a great way to solve that problem and still get your dog the nutrition that they need. I mean, it's not all that different from me. Like I'm always sort of doing that calculus of how do I make sure my nutrition is optimized in a way that's not going to put me in the kitchen for an hour every day? So maybe that means I have to get meals delivered. Maybe that means I cook a bunch of food on Sunday and then I have meals for the rest of the week. It just depends. You have to figure out what works in your life. I have clients that, their zen space is in the kitchen and they want to cook for their dog, and that's amazing. And, I fully encourage that. I will give them a recipe and say, "Here, go do this." If that works for you, great, but for the rest of us, we need a solution that works for the dog, but also works in our life.
I really appreciate that. I like cooking on my terms. And
Right.
it's a ritual that, we like to do, but I don't
You
wanna be
don't wanna
cooking for
have
the
to do
dogs
it.
every day.
Right.
I don't wanna have to do it, and man, life has a lot of, darts it's thrown your way. Um, you mentioned something that some people would take issue with, and I wanna kinda get it from the horse's mouth here, right? You said cooking for the dogs. I don't think I've ever seen a wolf in Yellowstone build a campfire and cook the thing that it did. So, breaking down and creating this thing called cooking as a way to help assimilate is, a human thing. Is it helping? Are you seeing that being a healthier way to get the food to the dogs versus the risks of giving them raw food and getting them sick and all the crap that could happen?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and for me, if there's magic in nutrition, I think the magic is in fresh whole foods. Probably the amount of daylight between raw food versus cooked food versus freeze dried food is not enough to really lose any sleep over. And while on the one hand, I think it's unquestionable that dogs and cats are far more able to deal with foodborne pathogens than we are as humans. I mean, if I walked into the grocery store and bought a pack of chicken wings and ate them raw, I mean, you might as well just drive me to the emergency room because you know where that's going. But you can do that with most dogs, and they'll do just fine. That said, there are concerns potentially with cross contamination of raw food to humans, particularly if somebody's got an immune system issue. For a lot of people, it's just easier and more palatable for them to work with cooked food than to cut up a bunch of like raw organ meat and deal with that. Again, that goes back to that sustainability thing. How many people in my office am I going to get to go out and say, okay, I want you to go out and buy liver and lungs and heart and chop them up and feed them? People just aren't going to do it. It's gross and nobody wants to do that. So, if you're going to buy that raw, pre-made and ready to go, great. But if not, it may be that it's easier and more practical to do it with cooked.
I appreciate that. I think, it's very easy to become a philosophical purist in the world of medicine and functional medicine. And, I have these two beautiful white labbies who, grew up in the house and sleep in warmth. And, I've probably drank out of 10 rivers, right? So they do not have the microbiome of the wolf pup who was born and bred in the wild.
Sure.
And so the raw meat is a very different thing. It's, these are domestic animals. And so I think about these kind of purist arguments going, look, it's not the same. I mean, you're not living out there in the elements the same way a wild animal would be. And so I don't think my dogs have their immunity primed for that. And it's probably too late after the age of 2. I don't know. I mean, I'd love for you to weigh in on that.
No, it's a good point, and so I'll give you a great example. I just got back from 3 weeks in Tanzania. I was there with a group called International Veterinary Outreach, where we were both treating animals as well as teaching veterinarians and veterinary students about sort of small animal medicine from both an animal welfare perspective, but also from a disease prevention perspective. Because something like 1,500 people in Tanzania die from rabies every year, almost all of it kids and almost all of them from dog bites, which is just dumb because it's the easiest thing to prevent in the world. So anyway, we spent 3 weeks out there working with Tanzanian dogs that basically are dogs that they more or less live on their own. They sort of are owned by people in the sense that they hang around that person's house at night. But when the sun comes up, off they go out into wherever they go, hang out with their dog friends and forage for food. Nobody feeds them. They just eat what they eat. So there's a dog that is the exact same Canis domesticus as your dog, but that's a dog that could basically eat out of a dumpster and be quite happy about it. Pretty sure if my dog did that, it would not go well. I'm also pretty sure that me, who's been a vegetarian for 30 years, if I went out and ate a cheeseburger for lunch, it also would not go well because my gut is not prepared for that. So, like, could your dogs essentially learn to eat that way? Sure, they could, but they're certainly not prepared to do it now. So it's just a function of we're all living in the world that we're living in. And I'm certainly not advocating that people start feeding their dog out of the garbage can. But we just have to work within the framework that we're working with. And I think for in almost every respect, feeding our dogs clean food is to their benefit. It's there's no benefit in saying make sure your dog eats a rotten piece of meat once a month to strengthen their immune system. That makes no sense. And that's the blessing and the benefit we have of living where we live.
Yeah. Amen. And look, this isn't Little House on the Prairie, right? We all live in a society. We have stuff going. And frankly, I don't want to be cleaning my carpets, right? Like every time we change kibble, it's an issue, let
True.
alone if they
Yeah.
get into something. And we have wild animals around and we had an episode that just kept an ongoing episode with our dogs eating elk poop droppings, right? And the giardia that would come from it. Is
Yeah.
that good or bad for their microbiome? I mean, it is. And so, when we have these things introduced, it sucks. So things that are a little closer to home. This is, I don't know why it's still an ongoing debate in the Shojai household. Um, my answer is always no. My wife loves her dogs so much, they occasionally get table scraps.
Okay.
What's the line on this, doc?
All right. For starters, you are about to insert me into a marital argument, and I don't appreciate it. That said,
You're now a counselor, right?
this is not the first time, nor will it be the last. That said, so there's a couple of things to be said about table scraps. It depends on what you're eating. I know you, and you probably eat fairly healthy. So there's a very short list of things that like a person might eat that a dog should not eat. Things like onions, things like grapes, raisins, anything that's particularly spicy. Outside of that, meat, vegetables, what have you, they're fine for dogs. And honestly, I am very much okay with dogs eating those kinds of fresh foods, in addition to whatever diet they may be eating otherwise. The one thing that I would say, and this is more of a behavioral issue than a nutritional one, is you don't want to feed your dog from the table. Because the second you do that, what you've done is you've created a beggar, and the dog will never leave you alone while you're having dinner. So the way that you do that is whatever you're going to feed them, save it. And when everybody's done eating and gets up from the table, you put it in their bowl, and that's when they get to eat whatever it is that you're going to feed them. But that said, nutritionally speaking, if what you're eating is healthy, then there's no reason why your dog can't have some of it. So sorry
Okay.
if you just wound up on the wrong end
Yeah.
of that argument.
Well, I ended that was a 50-50 split for me 'cause we also have, table feeders, so, thank
Sure.
you. You armed me against that.
Okay.
Um, the eyeballs, the hair, the fur, the hooves. If you're trying I mean, listen, you're trying to feed them meat, it's like the side of a, leg muscle and, a chicken breast. Uh, these aren't things that you can readily get at the store. So if you're trying to give them the kind of whole nutritious diet with the like vitamin A and all the stuff that you find in the organ meats,
Yep.
aside from, some of the products that are out there now, like how hard is it to get this stuff?
It can be difficult to do, and it's an interesting point because, like, if you look at carnivores in the wild, a carnivore in the wild, be it a lion or whatever it may be, takes down an animal, and the first thing that they go for are the internal organs. They're gonna eat the liver, they're gonna eat the heart. Instinctively, they know where the nutrition is. The muscle meat usually goes last. So it's a really excellent point, and I think that as a sort of societally speaking, where we are, it is a difficult thing to do. So, for example, like I have known people. You mentioned that you don't know anybody that has a rabbit farm for this purpose. I've actually met a couple of people that do. But there are people that will feed literally a whole ground rabbit. The entire rabbit goes into the grinder, nose to tail. So everything goes in there. That said, for the rest of us where that's not really a practical possibility, that's when nutritional supplementation has to get added to these diets. Because you're never going to get, say, enough vitamin A in the diet if you're not putting like liver in the diet. So you just have to supplement it. It's not a big deal. There's a lot of ways to kind of get from A to B here. And when I provide people with recipes on how to cook at home for their dog or their cat, it's always with a list of nutritional supplements that you have to add. Because truthfully, if you're going to make a fresh whole food diet that is well balanced without adding supplements, you're talking about a diet that probably has 20 or more ingredients. It's not an easy thing to do. Um, and because, unlike an animal in the wild that's eating a lot of variety because, they're eating whatever presents to them in any given day, most of our dogs are eating the same thing on a regular basis, which means that if that diet, for example, is short in vitamin A, that deficiency is going to magnify over time. So we need to make sure that every meal these animals are eating are properly balanced. Whereas for you and I, the presumption is that it may not be that every meal I eat is balanced, but if I eat enough variety, I'm going to sort of make up for, for things in the aggregate. All that said, you better believe that I take supplements as well, because it's really hard to tell if you're getting everything that you need. So So the short answer to your question is you just supplement these diets to make sure that they have everything they.
Yeah, it's interesting too. The human microbiome is incredibly elaborate, and we have a lot more real estate, transit time in the intestines, and our biology is kind of co-evolved to work with lots of vegetables to create the butyrates to do the thing that allows for us to derive more of kind of these downstream substrate from what we're eating.
Sure.
These guys aren't eating leafy green vegetables. They might be chewing on grass once in a while, but dogs and cats for the most part, meats, right? Animals, fur. And so I think that's a really important point for the listeners to get is it is going to be incredibly hard unless you're the rabbit farmer. And even the rabbit farmer, look, today you got a rabbit, tomorrow you got a possum, and you might have gotten a bird the following week. Like there's still variety and variance in what these things used to hunt.
Right.
So how hard would it be to get it all? And to me, it's darn near impossible in the world we live in.
It is. It's darn near impossible. And let's also remember that from the standpoint of an animal that's sourcing their own food, the other thing that they're getting on a day-to-day basis is nothing. So there is something to be said for they're not necessarily eating every day. And that brings up a whole nother conversation about the relative benefits of things like intermittent fasting. And this comes back to what our bodies are evolutionarily designed to thrive on. Our ancestors, when they were hunting and gathering, they weren't eating every day. So that's how our bodies developed. There's actually evidence to show that, for example, with dogs that are eating once a day actually live longer than dogs that are eating twice a day. That's not a study that you see quoted a whole lot, but I find it fascinating because it sits right in the wheelhouse of what we all know about intermittent fasting for us.
That's fascinating. That is not I mean, aside from the guilt of eating in front of them, um, right, which is a thing,
Yeah.
right? People have it, it's like, they're not at the dinner table, but they're part of the family.
Sure.
What if you have a dog that is eating twice a day, how would you recommend starting to titrate down that one meal and training them to move to once a day? I mean, if the evidence I mean, to me, it's a slam dunk. If you give them the same amount of calories once a day, one big meal, who cares, right? You probably have less times to gather poop.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depending on the sort of the personality and level of food motivation of your dog, that may or may not be a difficult thing to do. Clearly, the much easier thing to do is to acclimate them to once a day feeding from day one. So it's never a thing for them. But yeah, I mean, if you have a dog that's used to eating twice a day, it may not be easy to sort of take a meal away from them because they're going to be after you incessantly because they think they're starving to death. Um, that said, are you a bad dog owner if you feed your dog twice a day? Clearly not. I mean, there's far easier things that you can do that are going to have an impact before you have to get to that. But I think it really just speaks to this whole concept of we have to feed these animals based on what they're biologically designed and optimized for.
Makes sense. And what makes sense here is, I mean, obviously, food motivated dogs and behavior and snacks, right? If you're just constantly peppering calories throughout the day, you're never giving them a chance to fast either,
Yes.
right? Which, again, this is the context under which we started this call was I met you at a human longevity conference where we know, caloric restriction and intermittent fasting and time delayed eating are definite movers of the needle for this type of mammal.
Hmm.
So, of course, it would translate,
Yeah.
right? Of course, it would translate. What else? What are the other kind of big levers we can pull? We talked about supplementation, we talked about, diet in general, right? And now we're talking about intermittent fasting for dogs, which may or may not be too late for, current dog owners.
Yeah.
What are the other big levers, dogs or cats? Sorry, and I want to make sure I'm a dog guy, so I'm like very dog centric, but let's just make sure our cat owners feel loved up here too.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, everything that we're talking about is applicable for dogs and cats. The finer points of their nutritional profile is different, but the principles are the same. So, when we're talking about health and longevity for animals, You know, the again, the basics are no different than what you and I know as far as health and longevity for us. Um, so, certainly there's a lot of things that I do in my office, whether or not it is kind of more advanced supplementation, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it is regenerative medicine, so stem cell therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, things of this nature. All of that stuff is available. And for the sake of saying it, all of that stuff is very, very sort of carefully detailed and outlined in the books that I just came out with, Longevity for Dogs and Longevity for Cats, for people who really want to dig into that. Um, when it comes to sort of this question of like, what can anybody do at home that is going to make a difference? The things you don't need me for. Certainly, diet is one of them. And the other two sort of legs of that triangle are exercise and lifestyle. Again, this is no different than it is for people. So we got to get their diet right. They need an appropriate amount of exercise. And I think appropriate amount is really to be highlighted here. Um, because over-exercise is problematic as well. Over-exercise is asking for injury, is gonna cause all kinds of other problems, but by far and away, the bigger problem with animals, just like with people, is under-exercise. So much of that, and again, this is a little bit more of a dog-specific comment, but so much of that is relative to, A, what kind of dog do you have? Because, for example, a border collie is going to have a much different exercise requirement than, say, an English bulldog. And a lot of this has to do with the owner's lifestyle. And this is one of these things that I often tell people the time to start addressing these sort of exercise and lifestyle questions is before you get a dog or before you get a cat. You have to think about what is going to fit into your lifestyle. So if you're the kind of person that works a 16-hour day and you live in a one-bedroom condo, probably getting a real high energy dog is a bad plan for you. The problem that we often see, if I could leave people with anything from this chat, is that so many people get a pet based on aesthetics. I like the way that dog looks, um, without really doing any research into whether or not this is going to work out long term. That same person will spend 6 months researching what kind of television to buy, and they'll probably have the thing for 5 years. When they'll get a dog on a whim, and this is a 15, 20-year investment. This dog is going to last longer than quite possibly any other relationship in this person's life. So, sad truth, but it is what it is. Getting a pet whose lifestyle sort of interacts well with your own is a big thing because not getting enough exercise for an animal, number one, it's going to lead to weight gain, poor muscle mass, bad joints, all kinds of health problems that sedentary people wind up with. But the other aspect of it really sort of bleeds into this lifestyle conversation, which is understimulated animals are anxious, they become self-destructive, they have stress, they have anxiety, and all of those things shorten lifespan and health span. We all know this from our own health. Anybody that is of adult age has experienced that stress and anxiety has a physiologic effect. If you've never had a stomach ache from being stressed out, you're living a far better life than I am. The same thing is true for our animals. But the thing is just like with their food, these animals are 100% reliant on us for everything. So their food, their exercise, their lifestyle, it all comes from us. So getting them out for an appropriate amount of activity, whether that's a walk, a run, a swim, whatever it may be, it kind of really depends on what kind of dog you have, and making sure that their life is, relatively speaking, low stress. So for example, if somebody lives in a very high tension household, maybe they have a very tumultuous relationship and there's a lot of yelling and there's a lot of anxiety, or maybe they live in a house with like six small children. Um, these things are going to put a lot of stress on an animal, particularly a cat. And these things will ultimately have negative impacts on their health span and lifespan. So these are all things that we need to think about. But again, they're also things that you as a pet owner can take care of at home. Doesn't cost you a thing. You don't need to come have a consultation with me to make sure your dog's getting enough exercise or that their life is reasonably speaking low stress. This is the low hanging fruit anybody can do, and that's the foundation upon which you build and saying, okay, what supplements do we need to add in? What pharmaceuticals? What vaccines does this dog need? Regenerative medicine. All that stuff is great, but if you're gonna put that on top of a dog that has poor diet and not getting enough exercise, you're not getting anywhere. I mean, a person that's overweight and is a chronic smoker that's taking a bunch of supplements probably isn't doing themselves a whole lot of good. And it's the exact same problem.
Yeah, I love that. I always say we can't detox and retox at the same time, which
True. Well spoken.
it's a big problem with humans, it's a big problem with dogs. Okay, we're running out of time, and I wanna ask one more important question. As a veterinarian, as a lifelong dog owner, people we now have some sort of, like, insurance that helps with vet bills, which I think my wife's happy about. But we have, it's always like, the running joke, you can't go to our vet without spending 300-400 bucks. And those things for a lot of people end up adding up and making it, very stressful, right? As a
Yeah.
dog or cat owner. So, what do you think is aside from the wonderful things that we've talked about, one of the biggest levers that if people understood and pulled would save them in the downstream veterinary bills and the things that are preventable in your universe? I mean, it could be one or two, but just the things that you can easily prevent in terms of costs and grief downstream.
Sure. Things that can easily be prevented. Injury. So animals that get hit by a car. Particularly if you have a cat, keep your cat indoors. For the love of God, keep your cat indoors. The average lifespan of a strictly outdoor cat is something like 3 years. These animals do not live long. So keep your cat indoors. Um, when you exercise your dog, do it someplace safely. Do it someplace where they're not likely to get hurt. Don't let them do exercise that is going to invite an orthopedic injury, like a lot of frisbee chasing or ball chasing, where they're probably going to blow out a knee. So appropriate amounts of exercise are really important. Spend a little more money on the nutrition so that they don't wind up with the chronic inflammatory diseases down the road. These are two really important things to do. Other things that you might be able to talk to your veterinarian about, but you can also sort of read about in my books and others is what type of preventative healthcare is recommended and what type is not. So, for example, I am certainly not anti-vaccine, but I am absolutely anti-over-vaccine. And many, many dogs and cats are chronically over-vaccinated to their detriment. I think there's a conversation to be had about when animals should be spayed and neutered, because if you do it too early, you may be inviting medical problems later. Certainly, not doing it all also presents some real potential problems. So, that's a conversation that needs to be had with a veterinarian that understands the various pros and cons of when these things should be done. So, what is not sort of hardwired into us as people is preventative care. We just are not really good at thinking about how to prevent things from going wrong. Evolutionarily speaking, we're real good at if the tiger jumps out of the bush, run away. We're real good about that. What we're not good about is sort of thinking about, hey, 6 months or a year from now, are the things that I'm doing right now going to cause me problems then? It's the reason why people smoke cigarettes. They know intuitively that it's going to kill them, but are they thinking about that every time they light up? Of course not, because it doesn't have an immediate negative impact. It's a down the road impact, and we're not real good about thinking about that. And the one other thing I'll bring up, because you just mentioned it in passing, is pet insurance. I am a huge, huge advocate for pet insurance. You know, the good news is in the 25 years I've been a veterinarian, the quality of veterinary care has advanced by leaps and bounds. The bad news is it's bloody expensive. And it is not hard at all for somebody to run up a bill in the tens of thousands of dollars in a big hurry. And there's nothing more tragic than seeing people have to make life and death decisions for their pet based on what they can afford. So, pet insurance these days is quite good. I would very much recommend people do their homework and figure out what company and what policy works best for them from the perspective of what do you want your deductible to be, coverage limits, all this sort of stuff. But if your pet has some sort of catastrophic injury or illness, you don't want to have to make a decision on treatment based on can I pay for this? And the irony is in many ways, pet insurance actually pays better than human insurance. I have pet insurance. I have clients with pet insurance in my office. The insurance is paying 90% not only of their medical, physical therapy, hyperbaric oxygen, herbs, medical cannabis gets covered, you name it. Insurance will frequently cover it as long as the veterinarian has recommended it. So get pet insurance for your pet so you don't have to make those tough decisions.
Sounds like the early days of medical insurance before the bean counter started squeezing.
Right?
Yeah. Used to be good too.
Yeah.
So, longevity for dogs, longevity for cats. I will post links to it. If you got both, get both books. If you got one, absolutely get the books. My dogs love the freeze dried food that you've provided. And look, I think everything you've said here has been more than sane, more than reasonable. I love your perspective. I love talking to clinicians, boots on the ground clinicians who see the real politique. There's a lot of, hyperbole. People could say things from academia that have never seen a dog or a cat and don't realize how hard it is to do what they're recommending. I love talking to people who are, on the ground doing the work and know, the reality is I'm not going to feed rabbits every day. So what do I do, doc?
Sure.
Right. So really appreciate your perspective, appreciate your friendship, and I invite everyone to read the books and have the knowledge to be able to prevent some of the things that are coming downstream, and also just give these loved ones, they're part of our family, the quality of life they deserve.
Agreed. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You bet.